Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this time, I wanted to talk to you about Venus coming out of retrograde on April 12th. This is good news because Venus is coming out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Pisces is a zodiac sign that Venus is exalted in, meaning most celebrated in. And that's something that's very fortunate for all of us because Venus has a lot of cleaning up to do. So what does Venus do in astrology? Venus is the planet of attraction in astrology. Named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, Venus's mission is to attract those people into your life whom you click with. People who love the same music that you do, people who hate the same politicians that you do, and people who know what you're thinking before you're going to say it, and who have your best interests at heart. In other words, Venus brings people into your life, people who truly get you. And the reason that Venus does this is because she knows that in order to flourish in this world, you need to surround yourself with the right people, because nobody makes it on their own in life. Every life is a cooperative effort. Now, on February 4th of this year, Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries. Aries is ruled by the planet Mars. So this is why we would say that when Venus is in Aries, she is in the zodiac sign of her detriment. Now, that was a lot of astrological gobbledygook that I just threw at you there, so let me break it down and make it more simple. A planet moves through a zodiac sign, just like a person moves through a turnstile or customs. A planet is like a person, and a zodiac sign is like the place where they are. So when we say that Venus is in the zodiac sign of Aries, it's kind of like saying that Venus is in the state of California. Okay, you've got a planet, which is like a person, Venus, and a place where it is traveling through, which is a state like California, or an astrological sign like Aries. Now, there are certain signs that planets do very well in, and certain signs that planets don't do as well in. Okay, so when Venus is traveling through a zodiac sign like Aries, which is ruled by Mars, she is said to be in her detriment. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that she's having trouble exercising her powers as the planet Venus. Venus is the planet of love and peace and harmony. So as you might imagine, Venus is going to have some difficulty being peaceful and harmonious and loving when she's traveling through a zodiac sign like Aries, which is ruled by Mars, which is named after the Roman god of war. So this can be a difficult or a challenging placement for Venus. And this is the zodiac sign that she entered into on February 4th of this year. Now, on March 1st, Venus turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, remember, she's already having a hard time being peaceful and harmonious and loving in the zodiac sign of Aries. Imagine a planet that wants to appear in Paris and couturier and walk down a runway, all of a sudden being thrown into battle fatigues and forced to go and march with a whole bunch of soldiers through some sort of enemy territory, okay? Venus is not really at her shining best when she's in the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, on March 1st of this year, Venus turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. Talk about overkill. I mean, not only is she struggling in the zodiac sign of Aries, but she's now retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, when a planet turns retrograde, that is a backwards motion in the sky. And more often than not, when a planet is retrograde, it is said to behave in the opposite manner that it does when it's moving direct in the sky. Our most famous example of this is Mercury turning retrograde. Mercury is the planet of buying and selling, and when it's moving forward in the sky, Sales are wonderful, but when Mercury is moving retrograde in the sky, when it stops and reverses its motion in the sky, that's when purchases don't go off as well, when the things that we're used to automatically doing in our day-to-day lives become befuddled, when appliances that we rely on go on the fritz, or our automobile all of a sudden has problems with it. All of these things that rule over how we get from one place to another, whether it's physically getting from one place to another or going from one to-do list task to another on our to-do list, all of it gets entangled and befuddled when Mercury, which is the ruler of commutes and things like to-do lists and technology, when Mercury is moving retrograde. So when Venus is moving retrograde in the sky, she's already in the zodiac sign of Aries. Does that make her more warlike? Does that make her more difficult? Well, you tell me how your relationships have proceeding since March 1st of this year. And Venus doesn't just rule over romantic relationships. Venus also rules over business partnerships and relationships, creative collaborations. Anytime that two people come together, they pair off with one another so that they can accomplish more together as a pairing than they would separately on their own. Any sorts of these partnerships or pairings are going to be ruled by Venus. So Venus moving retrograde can be an about face, things that were once understood and simpatico and we really get along. All of a sudden, you're not experiencing that. You're experiencing tension or frustration or more arguments than usual. And you're suddenly realizing why you partnered with someone who's such a loser or so ill-humored or is really bringing you down. Okay, so these things can happen when Venus turns retrograde. But what I've also seen in the work that I've done over the decades that I've been in astrology is that a retrograde can also signal a time when the planet withdraws its energy. What does that mean? A retrograde can signal a time when a planet stops doing its job. Now, this is fascinating with a planet like Venus, because Venus, as I said before, is the planet of love and peace and harmony and beauty. If Venus stops doing her job, which is to bring people together in a couple or a partnership or a pairing to make things more attractive, more alluring, when she stops doing her job, things don't flow as harmoniously as they do when she's moving forward in the sky. Now, what's interesting about this is that we know that Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, who in turn is named after Aphrodite, who was the Greek version of Venus. But we have an earlier predecessor to Venus, and that is the Sumerian goddess Inanna. She's a sort of forerunner of Venus. Now, remember that Venus is the goddess of love and harmony, but in Sumeria, Inanna was the goddess of love and fertility. Okay, we've got that part. But Inanna was also the goddess of war. And so what's fascinating about this is that in Sumer, which predates Rome and which predates Greece, in ancient civilization, it's right between the Tigris and Euphrates. In Sumer, Inanna was a goddess of love and war. So both love and war were embodied in one deity. So this idea of a backwards motion, this idea of an about face, this idea of a withdrawing, okay, these are all things that can be associated to a Venus retrograde. So when Venus turns retrograde, this can signal a time when those things that are ruled by Venus, those things like love and beauty, but let's also include treaties and truces, pledges and promises. These are also things that are ruled by Venus. So when Venus turns retrograde, things like love and beauty, treaties and truces, pledges and promises are suddenly revoked. And that is never a good idea. Now, an additional complication that was thrown in during this time that Venus has been retrograde is that on March 27th of this year, 2025, Venus left the zodiac sign of Aries and re-entered Pisces. Now, remember, retrograde means backwards. So Venus was in Aries, and then she moved backwards into the zodiac sign that comes before Aries in the zodiacal wheel, and that is Pisces. All right, so that's what's going on here. And whenever you have a planet change zodiac signs during a retrograde, that basically means all bets are off. In other words, whatever was decided, made peaceful, made harmonious, made good when Venus was first traveling through the zodiac sign of Pisces, that would have been from January 2nd until February 3rd of this year, all of that was constant and stable and secure, the things that make our relationships good and grow and prosper, is that feeling of constancy, is that feeling of stability, is that feeling of security. Okay, so during this period of time from January 2nd to February 3rd, this was good. Agreements were kept, truces were made. Well, when Venus comes back down into Pisces, all of this is undecided. Okay, all of this is turned upside down. And that is what happened when Venus retrograded back down into Pisces on March 27th. It's not unlike, let me see if I can think of an example. Okay, I've got it. It's not unlike trying to get back together with someone after a major breakup. Okay, you might be feeling like, I want to take this person back, or let's try again, or maybe maybe breaking up wasn't a good idea. I miss this person. So you're trying to get back together with someone after a breakup, but there's no denying that there has been a loss of faith. There's no denying that there has been a loss of trust. So even though your heart is in the right place, which is, okay, let's try again. Let's try to make up. There's still that feeling of, I don't know if I can believe you. I don't know if I trust you. I don't know if I believe in us. I don't know if us is a good idea. So what you're trying to do here is pick up the pieces, but the pieces, like with anything that's been broken, just don't fit like they used to. Now, on April 12th, which is just a few days ago, Venus came out of retrograde, but she came out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Pisces and not Aries. Okay, so remember when she began her retrograde, she was in Aries. She went back down into Pisces, which is a different sign. When she switched from Aries to Pisces, it was all bets off. She comes out of her retrograde in Pisces on April 12th. And so this tells us two things. That astronomically speaking, Venus is traveling behind the sun so that she's playing catch up. Okay, she's trying to catch up to where the sun is in the sky, and that eventually she must leave Pisces, which is the sign of her exaltation, and re-enter Aries, the sign of her detriment. So in other words, that's kind of like Venus has to leave Pisces, a bubble bath that is warm and gentle and lovely and really enjoyable, and go back to Aries, which is putting on those army fatigues and marching through those muddy hills and being back in battlegrounds and enemy territory again. Not exactly inviting to Venus, named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, but this begs the question, the greater question, which is the greater question about a relationship or an association or an alliance or a collaboration that you have right now. It begs the question, am I better off without this person or this other party? Or am I going to try to make things work? Okay. And if I do make things work, am I moving ahead in my life? Or am I going back in my life? And so these are the questions that are going to be on your mind right now, which is, was I better off without this person? Okay, now, and that might be a decision. You decide just to not be with this person. Okay, that's game. That's on the table. Okay. But for those of you who are thinking, okay, let's try to see if this can work, if maybe a round two is worth it. The question is always going to be, am I going back to this person because I was afraid of moving forward with my life? Or am I going back to this person because we are a good fit, it's worth fighting for? So am I moving ahead in my life or am I going back? These are the things to keep in mind in the weeks that follow Venus coming out of retrograde.
Hey there, Astrology Hub. I'm Catherine Plano, founder of Rise and Thrive Coaching Academy. If you've ever wanted to turn your passion for astrology into a meaningful, sustainable career, we've created the perfect pathway just for you.
And then I was listening to Astrology Hub, and then I heard you with Amanda, and I was like, oh, now I've found the way to integrate both of them, you know, my passion for astrology and my passion for coaching.
This program is grounding my years of alternative and esoteric knowledge so that I can become a mentor for youth using the wisdom of the elements and the stars.
You have the tools, which I think you've done a great job of providing, and all the modalities, and you can articulate those conversations in a much more rounded way and reach people all over the globe, opposed to just staying in one lane.
I have gotten more confidence. I've faced myself, my fears in ways that I wanted to, but this has helped me to face those and find skills that I've been looking for with lots of good support.
It has really given me courage to step out and be confident in myself where I am and be kind to myself, just filled with joy and gratitude for where I am at this moment.
Our next cohort, designed specifically for the Astrology Hub community, begins this May. Spaces are limited, so if you're ready to take the next step towards a soul-aligned, viable career, helping others grow, heal and thrive, then visit riseandthrive.com.au/AH to reserve your spot today. And we can't wait to welcome you in.
So if you're born under Aries, or if you have Aries rising, Venus in your sign turns you into the favorite. Okay, this is what Venus does in a zodiac sign, regardless of whether she's exalted at home, detriment, and fall. What Venus does is that she makes you flavor of the month. And seeing as Venus spends around a month's time in a zodiac sign, the label really does describe things well. It really does fit, okay? So when Venus entered your zodiac sign of Aries, she turned you into a favorite, okay? You might have been a favorite of a boss, of a superior, a favorite of a clique of friends, a favorite of a social circle. Now, what happens when Venus turns you into a favorite, which sounds like a really great thing at first, is that Venus can also make you the object of unwanted attention, okay? In other words, you know, if you're favored by someone, you're going to be disfavored by others. Why are you going to be disfavored by others? Because they're going to be jealous, they're going to be envious, they're going to say, well, what's a great deal about that person? I think that person's rather plain and homely looking. You know, I'm better looking. You know, so this is what can happen when Venus shows favor. Venus will shine the light on one person, and they're like, oh, the favorite, you know, and everyone else is like, I hate you, you know, type of thing. That can happen, you know, even though more people than not are singing your praises and very happy to celebrate you. Now, when Venus turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aries, that would have created an uncomfortable situation for you. Now, how I would interpret that is Aries isn't really comfortable with being a favorite, okay? Aries is much more comfortable with being a winner, okay? So Aries is more comfortable with having accomplished something that shows that they were better, tougher, more resilient, you know, that they're the winner of a competition. If Aries wins a competition, that's good, because that gets into that Mars competitive fight for what I want impulse that's going on. But if Aries is favored, okay, and by that, you know, someone comes to you and holds your hand, holds your head, your chin in their hands, and they're like, you are favored, you are wonderful. Aries isn't really comfortable with that, because what did they do to earn it? So the unwanted attention for you with Venus in Aries, if you're born under Aries or have Aries rising, might have been the feeling of, well, I didn't really earn this, or I don't, you know, I don't like being singled out in that way without having fought for it, you know? And so the retrograde would have created uncomfortable feelings around that, and really kind of like, you know, like I didn't really deserve this, and stop showing so much attention to me, and things like that. So that when Venus retrograded back into Pisces, the sign that precedes Aries, on March 27th, this might have felt more like, okay, I'm giving up this favor. I don't want the favor. Like, show the favor to someone else. Don't show it to me. And so it might have been a denial of that, or give the prize to someone else. They need it more, or they're better. Something like that. Something in which you were deflecting the attention, or maybe even giving back the thing that made you the favorite, or asking the person who singled you out to stop doing that. It makes you uncomfortable. You don't really like it. Now, you did a period of time with Venus and Pisces where you might have really expressed those self-sacrificing energies, and you might have felt good about giving back the favor. But as Venus slowed again and started moving towards coming out of retrograde, you probably began to realize that maybe it wasn't a good idea to give back that favor, that it made you uncomfortable, but you kind of liked it, or it was yours, and why should it go to someone else? So there's a rethink, there's a second thought that's going on about this. So with Venus coming out of retrograde on that April 12th date, there's a thinking better of it. Like, I was dumb to have done that. Like I want it back, might almost be what you're feeling. And so when Venus comes out of retrograde on April 12th, there may be this feeling of reclaiming what you want, that you might have felt apologetic or humble, you weren't comfortable with it. And other people were more than happy to say, well, I'll take it. Or, well, if you're not going to be the pretty one, I'll be the pretty one. And you sort of realizing, maybe I shot myself in the foot by doing that. Maybe that wasn't a smart decision. I sabotaged myself or something like that. So now you're feeling like, I want it back, and I'm not going to sabotage myself. And why am I letting other people go in front of me when that is something that I want? So what you're going to feel as you move on forward is wanting to reclaim that favor, wanting to reclaim that attention. And another little thing, which is, screw what other people think. I mean, okay, that's maybe a little, but yeah, that's what you're going to be thinking, which is like, I gave this up because, I didn't want to feel bad with all this attention. And if people think I'm selfish and full of myself, let them think I'm selfish and full of myself, because you know what? I deserved that favor. I earned that favor, and I want it back. If you're born under Taurus, or you have Taurus rising, then your ruling planet is Venus. A ruling planet is the planet that rules the zodiac sign that you were born under. It's your sort of, patron saint, corporate sponsor, den mother, and life coach all wrapped up into one. If you're born under the zodiac sign of Taurus, then you want to pay a special attention to where Venus is in the sky, because Venus is your ruler. Venus is the planet that is the most involved in your interests and promoting your interests. If she's going through a good patch of sky, then this is a time when you can really feel confident about making forward progress in your life. And if she's going through a rough patch of sky, this is a period of time where you might not want to be as aggressive or as, pushing your own agenda, because it's a rough patch of sky and it might not be sitting well with other people. And how your actions sit well with other people is going to be important to you, Taurus, because again, Venus is your ruling planet, and Venus is always concerned about how you come across to other people. Optics are always important. So when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries at the beginning of this year, Venus might have brought out more of your self-sabotaging tendencies. Now, let me condition that. When I do these horoscope forecasts, I'm working with the solar chart, okay, which is basically your own sign as the ascendant, and the houses follow in succession. So in the solar horoscope for Taurus, Venus would have been entering a zodiac sign that was associated with what we call the 12th house. And the 12th house can be the house of hidden enemies. That's people who don't mean well by you at all. And it can also be the house of self-sabotaging patterns. The 12th house has other aspects involved with it as well, but I want to focus here more on Venus traveling through the 12th, the retrograde, and what that means to you. So earlier in the year, when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries, Venus in Aries put you in a troubled patch of sky. Remember how I was saying earlier that Venus is in detriment in the zodiac sign of Aries? So you might not have been aware how much people were reacting to you in not the most supportive or positive way. You also might not have been aware of how you might have been putting people off. So the idea that I would come to mind is sort of describing like, sort of, do you think this might have happened to you way, is that when Venus is traveling through Aries, which is Mars ruled, Venus becomes more aggressive, okay? Venus doesn't get passive aggressive. Venus becomes more aggressive. We're used to thinking of Venus as asking politely for things, but when Venus is in a Mars-ruled sign, Venus doesn't waste time with asking politely for things. She goes and she grabs it, okay? So what can happen when Venus is traveling through Aries, which is a zodiac sign that comes before you, Taurus, in the zodiacal wheel, is that you might have felt yourself being kind of like a bit of suffering from what I would call aggressive annexation. Okay, Taurus is already of the mind that what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too. Taurus is very much about turf and very much about expanding one's turf, all right? But when you've got like a Venus in Aries mixing and mingling with Taurus energy, it's a kind of like, that's mine, and you know what, that's mine too. And so a good way to think of it is Taurus already has issues with sharing anything in terms of property or space. Bathroom cabinet is a real reliable illustration. And so what can happen if you share a bathroom cabinet with the Taurus is that they gradually start taking over more and more space in the medicine cabinet, okay? And so when you have Venus moving through Aries like this, you might have been encroaching on other people's space and calling it yours, okay? In this what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too sort of way. Usually Taurians are a bit more subtle about that, but when you have Venus traveling through Aries, you probably were much more aggressive and maybe even blatant about that. And during that period of time that Venus was in Aries, you might have upset some people. Now, when Venus turned retrograde, like she did in Aries, this might have gotten you to double down on this annexation thing. In other words, it's like, I saw an opportunity to expand and take over more territory. I took it. And it's not like you were doing anything with it. You weren't. So this is now mine. And now I'm going to double down on this, And now that people are kind of like, well, maybe I wanted, that, or, hey, I used to have more room in the medicine cabinet. What are you doing? Type of thing. And it's like, well, you weren't using your side of the medicine cabinet. So I just didn't think you wanted it. So I took it. And it's like, well, even if I wasn't using it, it's still my prerogative. I might have used that space in the medicine cabinet. And, Taurus is like, well, you weren't, and now it's mine. Okay, so that might have been what happened. That's my illustration for you today. And people might have been like protesting, and you would have been like, well, you weren't using it. And they were like hurt feelings and like annoyed and resentful. And so this could have been the tense, the build-in tension that might have come into your life around the period of time that Venus turned retrograde. So that when Venus retrograded or changed signs, okay, Venus retrograded from Aries into Pisces on March 27th. During her retrograde, she changed signs on March 27th. You might have begun to recognize for yourself that this isn't good, that someone's making faces, or there's chilly silences, or you're maybe even beginning to feel a little bad or guilty, or questioning yourself, like maybe, it wasn't a good idea to go and grab that extra real estate in the medicine cabinet, something like that. And so what's kind of nice about this is that Venus retrograded into Pisces, which is the zodiac sign of her exaltation. If Venus struggles in a zodiac sign like Aries, she's exalted or most celebrated in a zodiac sign like Pisces. And what's nice is that Pisces is a water sign, Taurus is an earth sign, and so that creates a sextile energy between the two signs. And so what kind of happens here when you've got a Venus in Pisces sextiling Taurus, which is your zodiac sign, sextiles are conversational by nature. Okay. A trine is when two planets are of the same element, and so they're always going to back one another up no matter what. Okay. With a sextile, the planets are of the same gender. We've got feminine signs and we have masculine signs. Nowadays, we'll say we've got yin signs and yang signs. Earth and water are the feminine or the yin signs. Air and fire are the masculine or the yang signs. Taurus is earth, Pisces is water. You pour water on a planet, it grows. That's basically how that works. Okay, these are elemental energies that grow and produce things, actual things that are alive and living. Okay, so with that energy, that sextile energy, the planets become more conversational with one another. And so the Venus, having retrograded back down into Pisces, changes its mindset and it starts going, well, you know what, Taurus, maybe you were a little grabby. Maybe you should have asked first or something, or negotiated, maybe traded something for something else with the person. And then being a Taurus with your ruling planet in Pisces, your mindset becomes more sympathetic to taking on that idea. There's more perspective, okay? And more like, maybe I was a little grabby and maybe that's not so good. So now that Venus is out of retrograde on April 12th and she's moving forward again, there's that question, which is, well, what do I do? I do like having more space in the medicine cabinet, but does that mean I have to like give it up or relent or yield or back off? And if I do, is this going to be seen as a sign of weakness? Or if I do, is the person going to say, I want it back, not because they would have thought of it on their own, but because I'm like offering to like give them back that space, So these are the questions that are going to be going through your mind, Taurus, as Venus comes out of retrograde in Pisces, which is like, I want to make good, but, am I giving up too much? Or was it more my worry rather than the other person's? Or maybe they got used to my annexing their medicine cabinet space. So am I like, giving up things without having to give them up? These are quandaries. These are the horns of the dilemma that you'll find yourself pinned on. It's always best, okay, when a sign is moving forward again from one sign to another, particularly when it's your ruling planet going from the zodiac sign of her exaltation to the sign of her detriment. It's always best to apologize for overreaching and leave it up to the other person to decide. I know that feels vulnerable, but leave it up to the other person to decide. Apologize for overreaching. And if the person says, oh, it's no big deal, no worries, we're good, then no worries and you're good. But if the person is like, well, yeah, I actually did resent that. I didn't really like that, say, I'm sorry and give back. Or maybe the person's like, Thank you for, giving back your part of the medicine cabinet. And I can't wait to move more of my toothpaste and accessories into that. You're really generous. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And even though part of you is like, learn to live with it. Expand that energy of generosity, be very Venusian and say, I'm very happy that you're happy. And what you will have as a result is having gotten over something that you were feeling guilty about and tense about and making friends with someone that had become a little alienated. And that is always a good thing that happens when Venus comes out of retrograde. Now, if you're born under Gemini or you have Gemini rising, you began 2025 with Venus at the highest point of your solar horoscope, all right? And so when you have Venus at the highest point of your solar horoscope, this is what I've nicknamed the Vegas Venus. Okay, it's almost like Vegas with those signs saying, come in and, casino and sexy girls or something like that. I don't know, it's a Vegas Venus. It always makes me think of Carol Doda, a sign from San Francisco in the 1970s. But you began the year 2025 with Venus at the highest point and in the sign of her exaltation. And this is good. I mean, this would have brought people into your life who were really committed to your success. You yourself may have succeeded at something. You have a wonderful reputation. People are speaking well of you and saying all sorts of positive things. So you began the year with Venus at her highest point in your solar horoscope, meaning that she was attracting the most interest, the most comment, Terry, the most support and the most huzzas, people really celebrating you and your status. And this applies for people born under Gemini or who have Gemini rising. Now, this is good, obviously. I mean, who doesn't want this to happen, all right? But what can happen for those of you who have experienced this is that success can become a trap, all right? Success becomes a trap because you attract to you all of these people who are going to be your new besties, who are going to be part of your entourage, who are going to want the best for you. And as I said before at the beginning of this forecast, Venus brings people into your life who like the same things that you do, and hate the same things that you do as well. Okay. What can happen when you have Venus this exalted in a zodiac sign like Pisces, and this is where she was before she entered Aries, beginning of the year, is that you can live in a bubble, okay? And bubbles are ruled by Neptune, the modern ruler of Pisces, obviously, okay? I mean, like, bubbles are water, and water, is connected to the zodiac sign of Pisces. So when you're living in a bubble, you tend to believe what people tell you. You want to collect likes. It's like, I don't know, TikTok or Instagram or something like that. The more likes you get, the better you feel. I mean, this even produces in us, this feeling of euphoria and joy, and where we want to go to our TikTok account or Instagram account and see how many likes we've collected. And that makes us feel really, really good, okay? And Venus is the planet of likes. Now, Venus's entrance into the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th, remember that Venus is in detriment to the zodiac sign of Aries, it's Mars ruled. The attention changed. You might have started attracting the attention of people who wanted to be discordant, people who wanted to challenge you, people who were envious of you, people who, didn't like that you were being celebrated in some way, people who might have felt like you shouldn't be celebrated in some way, people who might have been critical. Okay, people who might have been like, yeah, that's good, but you could do better, or you're focusing on these plus points, but you're missing out on the negative points or the things that need to still be done, this sort of a thing. And again, Venus, when she's going through a Mars-ruled sign like Aries, particularly when she's going through Aries, doesn't want to hear that. Not when she's been in Pisces, okay? She doesn't want to hear about the people who don't like her or have a problem with what she's doing or her performance or something along those lines, And so Venus's reaction to that is like, everyone's a critic, And so what might have happened is that when Venus entered Aries in February, you might have begun relying more and more on the people who were like saying, ignore them. You don't, they're just spoilers. They're haters. They're trying to bring you down. We like you. We love you. And keep doing what you're doing. And you would have been like, of course you like me and love me. And I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing, things like that. And so, so this might have been what you started feeling when Venus was traveling through Aries, so that when Venus turned retrograde in Aries, and she turned retrograde on March 1st, you might have begun to question yourself of who's to be trusted, okay? I mean, it's nice to be surrounded by people who like the same things that you like, but are you getting the truth? Are they trustworthy? Are they just saying that because they want something from you, like a favor, and is there something truthful about the people who are having a problem with you, and maybe you be listening to that? So Venus retrograde would have introduced that moment of pause, that moment when you're like, well, maybe I should be listening to critics. Maybe they're not all haters, and maybe I'm being duped by people who only want to be friends with me because I'm a success. So these would have really brought up a lot of questions and doubts. At first, you wouldn't have liked it, but you're a Gemini. You're always playing around with an idea. You're always questioning things. And so at some point, you would have begun questioning whether you could really rely on the people who you've surrounded yourself with or not. So that when Venus re-entered the zodiac sign of Pisces, and that was on March 27th, that actually might have been you going and seeking the counsel of people you had known before you'd become such a success, okay? Not the people who came into your life afterwards, but the people who had helped make you a success. And they might have provided a bit of a reality check for you. You know, they might have said things like, listen, I'm really glad that you're such a success, and that's a wonderful thing. But you know, when you become a success, you actually have more of a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be a role model. When you become a success, you need to show more sensitivity to people who aren't doing as well as you. You know, and so you might have heard these things, and so this might have maybe sort of made you upset or maybe feel a little guilty or something like that. But at the same time, it would have stuck with you so that, you know, when Venus comes out of retrograde, there's that feeling of like, it's great to feel successful and have friends who support that, but I also need a little bit more distance on that. I need to be a little bit more objective on that. I need to not be so quick to believe everything that I'm being told right now. And so this reliance on your own ability to be a little bit more discerning, to be a little bit more critical, to be a little bit more distant around the people who are like, I think you're great. Okay, so that is going to become stronger when Venus re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries on April 30th. There may be one or two or three people who glommed onto you when you became the success that you're realizing now they're a liability and maybe you want more distance from, or maybe you want to discard altogether. Those might also be things that are happening as Venus travels through Aries in the weeks ahead. What's important, again, that I want to reiterate is that Gemini is a thinker, and Gemini is a natural doubter. You know, even if you don't want to doubt or you're feeling good about believing these things, there's always a part of you which is like, don't believe the hype. You know, don't believe the hype. Be discerning. Be critical of what you're hearing. And that's something that's going to become strong again in the upcoming weeks. And if anything, that is going to move you forward in your success rather than take the wind out of your sails. If you're born under Cancer, or if you have Cancer rising, it's no coincidence that Venus came out of retrograde on the same day that we had a full moon in Libra. And the day that I'm talking about here is April 12th. This would have been a kind of coming to your senses sort of moment when you could see for yourself the difference between relationships that drain you and relationships that sustain you. And truth to tell, even you're surprised by what you see. Now, Cancers, people born under Cancer who have Cancer rising, are often accused of being over-sentimental. Okay, you're over-sentimental because the moon is your ruler. You love things from the past or your childhood. You care about people's feelings and that people aren't hurt by the things that you do, and that people aren't hurt by what happens in this world. You know, Cancer is associated to the moon, which is associated to the good mother. And so everyone is a child to you, even if they're 20 years older. You're always tending to their hurt feelings or their scraped knees. Okay, you worry about these things and you want to tend to these things and you want people to feel better. These are the things that Cancers are very, that they respond to, that Cancers are pretty much about. Okay, so as a Cancer, you're used to being accused of being over-sentimental. That's something you got used to a long time ago. All right, you've heard that since you can remember. And you're also accused of holding on to relationships and associations that you should have let go of a long time ago. That's something that you don't really do. You know, you don't really let go of relationships and associations. And people say, you know, you've got a soft spot for this person. You're over sentimental. Why are you keeping this person around? But the truth of that bond that you have with people that lasts for such a long time in your life is that you accept people's foibles as being who they are. In other words, other people will say like, oh, why are you still friends with that person? You've gone forward in your life. Why do you still check in with them? That person's such a loser. Like, dump them and move forward in your life. As a Cancer, you don't do that. You know that, all of us, that for the grace of God could fall upon hard times or go through a difficult passage. And we would all want a friend in our corner, someone who know us very well. What this testifies about you is how strong the bonds are that you forge to people in your life, and how deep the commitment and the understanding is. This is something that's going to wind up proving to be a strength over the next 7 weeks. During this period of time, earlier, when Venus was going through Aries and it turned retrograde in Aries, you really thought about breaking ties with certain people in your life. You really wondered if you had been friends for too long. But now that Venus is coming out of retrograde, and again, she came out of retrograde when the moon, your ruler, was full in the zodiac sign of Libra, you were able to sort of hold two things in place at the same time. One was a deep and profound regard of relationships and associations, especially those that have been a part of your life for a very long time. And another one was a very deep and profound love and feeling of bonding. So even if there are relationships that you would be better off without, you're still going to want them in your life. You might change the degree of how you respond, but you're still going to want them in your life. And if anything, the fact that you stand by these relationships, these bonds that have lasted years, maybe even decades, this is a strength. And this is something that is going to prove to be a strength in the weeks ahead as you come back into territory in which you may feel challenged, knowing that you've got people in your corner that you can always turn to when going through a bit of a challenging patch of sky. If you're born under Leo or you have Leo rising, Venus's entrance into the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th was a good thing. Now, why was this a good thing? Venus, it's true, is in detriment in the zodiac sign of Aries, but Aries is a fire sign just like Leo. Okay, so that creates a trining energy, a simpatico-copacetic type of energy. So anytime a planet is moving through a fire sign, whether it's Aries or Sagittarius, being a Leo, that is always going to be of benefit to you. That's always going to be a plus in your plus column. You can look to that sign as bringing you support, opportunity, things that are good. So Venus's entrance into the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th was a good thing. It made you the apple of someone's eye. Okay, remember that Venus rules over the rule of attraction in astrology. And when she entered Aries, she made you the apple of someone's eye. Someone really desired you. And maybe you were flattered by this, and maybe you felt a little bit more about this. Maybe you wanted to even reciprocate or ask the person, why are you drawn to me? Why are you attracted to me? Let's talk about me. Okay, so this might have been what you were feeling around the time. But as a Leo, you might have already been spoken for in some regard. Maybe you caught the fancy of someone, but you're already in a relationship with someone else. Maybe you're in a work situation where you caught the fancy of someone, but you're working for someone else. That's kind of what I'm trying to set up here with the Venus being detrimental in some way. Being the apple of someone's eye isn't a bad thing, but what that could cause to happen if you're in a relationship with someone who's looking at you like, what are you doing to foster this attention? Or if you're working for someone who's like, don't get any ideas, this, as you can imagine, could have created some difficult situations, some problematic situations for you. So that when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st, you might have been like, okay, Leo, cool it. It's fun to be the apple of someone's eye, but it's upsetting someone that I am in a relationship with or that I work for, and it's not worth the aggravation. So just sort of cool it. Okay. And that might have been your resolve. But you also might have started thinking during this period of time that Venus was retrograde, and she turned retrograde on March 1st in Aries, is that it felt nice being the apple of someone's eye. It felt nice when someone was really interested in the things you had to say and was returning your feeling with more good feeling. And that person was pretty attractive, or that person was hinting at an offer or an opportunity that was really attractive. And maybe you're looking at the person you're with, either in business or romantically, and you're beginning to realize perhaps that, this person really treats me shabbily. This person really takes me for granted. And now that someone else is showing interest, that's got me thinking, that's got me feeling different feelings. And maybe the person that you work for or with, sensed that. And during this period of time when Venus was retrograde in Aries, sort of doubled down, like, became more possessive, or, the person might have said something that really hurt at work that made you feel insecure, and you were like, oh, maybe I did get too big for my britches, or maybe I did get too egotistical, or something along those lines. And so Venus is retrograde back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces on March 27th, might have shown you accepting this, or saying, it was my fault that I garnered this kind of attention. It was my fault that I had these ideas in my head. And so I'm going to just, be modest, and my ego was in the way, and it was my fault, or something along those lines. But this is the funny thing about retrogrades. If something doesn't sit right, no matter how we try to repress it or suppress it, it continues to not sit right. Okay. It just isn't, it just isn't sitting right. And so you might have begun to ask yourself some pretty uncomfortable questions in terms of, well, what would life be without this relationship? Or what would life be without this job? Maybe even received overtures. The person flirting with you was like, I'm madly in love with you and run away with me. Or maybe a person who saw merit in you was like, what, if you're ever looking for another job, here's my phone number, give me a call. So that when Venus came out of retrograde on April 12th, you might have really felt this, like, I'm ready to walk. I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm taken for granted, or I don't want to be working for someone who puts me down. I want to be in a situation where I really shine. And so this is kind of your headspace coming out of the retrograde. And you might be asking yourself quite seriously, is this the right thing to do? To break up or go and work for a different company. And as Venus re-enters Aries, on April 30th, sets up that trine energy to you again. And remember that Aries is a fire sign just like you, where you are doubtful and fretful. You might find yourself all of a sudden becoming very bold and very courageous and saying, yes, I do deserve better. I want something better, and that's what's going to make the next 7 weeks so dramatic, so revealing, and so ultimately good for you. If you're born under Virgo, or you have Virgo rising, this period of time that Venus was retrograde has really been an eye-opener for you. And it's also been a bit of a consciousness-raising experience for you as well. Now, when you're born under the zodiac sign of work and service, you make it a point to be there for other people. And being there for others is something that you naturally do, whether you're born under Virgo or you have Virgo rising. But ever since Saturn entered your opposite sign of Pisces in March of 2023, this fulfilling of obligations has been a bit of a challenge. In 2023, it became kind of a nagging doubt, something that you sort of entertained of, like, am I feeling exploited or used in some way? And those feelings would have increased through 2023 into 2024. And it might have remained as a sort of a point of contention that you kept returning to over and over and over again. I mean, it was one thing when you were just automatically being there for someone and being of service to someone, but you began to feel like maybe you were being exploited or not appreciated. Maybe you were even beginning to feel like there's more to life than this. And perhaps by the time we got to the beginning of 2025, you were ready to part company. You were ready to go your own separate ways. And you were pretty much clear about that. You were very committed to that idea. Now, when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries, like she did on February 4th, you might have experienced a crisis, or maybe what I should say is the person that you felt obligated to, the person that you were that you were working for, the person that you were serving underwent a crisis, underwent a really difficult time. And so this might have stopped you before you could really talk about your feelings of separating or going your own way. You might have said, oh, how can I bring this up when this person's going through a crisis, when they're going through difficulty? The last thing this person needs is someone else walking out on them. And so you might have actually stayed mum and committed yourself to that person. And said to yourself, as long as they're going through this crisis, I will be there for this person. Now, what can sometimes happen with a retrograde is that we regress. We kind of slip back into a role that we played before, a role that we find very familiar, and a role that we find very comfortable. And so as long as this person was going through a crisis, maybe it's someone you work for, maybe it's someone that you're emotionally bonded to in some way. It doesn't just have to be romantic. It could be a family member, a close friend. As long as this person was going through this crisis, then you didn't have to think about those unsettling feelings of like wanting to go your separate ways or something along those lines. And so that became the reason for staying together. And the retrograde might have shown you getting through the crisis, and things sort of becoming less critical, less crucial. And so that when Venus retrograded back down into Pisces, like she did on March 27th, you might have started feeling like, okay, do I still feel like I want to go my own separate way? This person still needs me. It's kind of comfortable, that idea. Maybe I'm going to stay here with that. Well, when Venus came out of retrograde on April 12th, it would have sparked that feeling of, okay, I could go back to what's comfortable, but there was a part of me that's been having a problem with this for a long time, and I really feel like I should move ahead with what I was ready to do at the beginning of the year. And so this is becoming a stronger and a stronger feeling within you, and a feeling of, I need to be true to myself and the other person and say that this situation that we have isn't really working anymore. And so you're kind of like, I almost see like you're getting up your gumption, your courage to talk about maybe parting company in terms of your relationship with this person. Now, Venus comes out of retrograde, like I said, on April 12th, but she's going to re-enter the zodiac sign of Aries on April 30th. And when she re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries on April 30th, that's going to bring the idea of a crisis back again. Okay, either the person goes through a crisis, they have need of you, something along those lines. This is what I meant by it's going to be very eye-opening, very consciousness-raising, and also very challenging for you. Because now that you're back in the crisis, the person is having a crisis again, you're going to feel like throwing off those concerns again. But you have to ask yourself, do you really want to be in a relationship with someone or an association with someone which is defined by crisis? Okay, that every time they're in a crisis, you're going to, go running back to them to help out. And part of it might be a true feeling for that person, but another part of you might be you were born under the zodiac sign of work and service, or Virgo is the zodiac sign of work and service. And is this becoming your way of sidestepping the greater issue, which is forging your own path into the future that maybe you decided a long time ago that you wanted out of this relationship or association? So with the reintroduction of a crisis, with Venus moving back into Aries, don't take this as a sign that you should be with that person. Question that, is it like, can you make a decision outside of feeling like you have to run to their rescue? And that's a real tough position to be in, but how you wrangle with that question and how you work with that question when Venus ultimately leaves Aries in a few weeks afterwards will leave you with a clearer idea of what you want in your life vis-a-vis relationships and associations. If you're born under Libra or you have Libra rising, then you know that your ruling planet is Venus. And if your ruling planet is Venus, then Venus retrograde was bound to create some sort of difficulty or trouble for you. Now, typically, when your ruling planet Venus is traveling through your opposite sign of Aries, like it has been, it puts you at a bit of a disadvantage because it makes you feel like it's the other person in a relationship or an association or a collaboration. It makes you feel like it's the other person who holds all the cards and that you are beholden. Now, Venus's retrograde on March 1st made matters worse, okay? So you were already feeling beholden to a partner or an associate or an ally or a collaborator when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th. But when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st, it made matters worse. Now, how did it make matters worse? It made you feel like circumstances were forcing you to bend your knee to this person in a very overt way. So it's one thing to sort of feel like someone else is holding all the cards or like you're beholden to someone else. It's another thing to feel like circumstances are forcing you to obey that person. Now, I'm not saying that that person was dominating you or domineering you at this point. My feeling was that it was much more circumstances that were making you stay with this situation. Like maybe you didn't have another opportunity to move on to. Maybe you owed this person money. Maybe you were in a financial situation where you were dependent on this person. So my feeling with this Venus retrograde in Aries is that it was more like circumstances, you looking at these things and saying, well, I can't leave now or go my own way now. It was circumstances that were forcing you to stay. Now, retrogrades, believe it or not, do have their advantages. That might be a little bit hard to wrap your mind around because we're used to thinking of retrogrades as period of times where things get really difficult, where they become very problematic. Mercury retrograde is famous for throwing monkey wrenches into the smooth running of our day-to-day lives. But as I said, retrogrades actually do have their advantages. Not only do they make an intolerable situation insufferable, okay, and you might be like, well, what's good about that? What's actually good about that is that if a situation becomes too difficult to handle, that's moving us in the direction of taking an action to resolve it or to address it in some sort of way. So not only do retrogrades make an intolerable situation insufferable, by their backwards motion, but they also provide some much needed distance on the matter. Now, it's no coincidence that there should have been a full moon in Libra, your own zodiac sign, on the same day that Venus came out of retrograde in Pisces on April 12th. What's good about this is that the full moon in Libra would have made you see that this situation that you're involved in is just really impossible to continue with. And the fact that Venus was coming out of retrograde in Pisces would have made you feel that you just don't have the energy, that you just don't have the interest, that you just don't have the feeling of resistance to continue in a relationship or association that just doesn't do it for you. You're not apathetic, you're exhausted. You're tired of the same fights. You're tired of the same worries. If the person is trying to pique your interest in some way, you're just not that interested. So what kind of happens with this full moon in Libra, which illuminates the emotional landscape for you, taking place at the same time that Venus is coming out of retrograde in Pisces, where you're just feeling the fatigue and the exhaustion, there's something nice about just not caring anymore, So all of that internal wrestling that you were doing, all of that internal questioning that you were doing, you just don't have the energy for it. And indeed, now that Venus is out of retrograde, and it came out of retrograde on April 12th, you would be well served by just saying it, you know, no more cryptic sighs or references or looking, disgruntled or at a loss. Just come out and say that you just aren't interested in continuing this association, that you just aren't interested in continuing this collaboration or relationship. Not only will the other person hear you, finally, okay, but they may be even willing to release you from your promise or your pledge. They might be in a mindset to sort of say, well, you've been looking miserable for a long time, and I was hoping we would get through it, but you know what? I'm convinced that you're pretty miserable, and I wish that we could work things out, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'm going to release you from this pledge. I'm going to release you from your promise, and you are free to go your own way. And that, Libra, is something you've been wanting to hear for the longest time. If you're born under Scorpio, or you have Scorpio rising, you've been feeling uncomfortable in your own skin for a long time. And this has really come out at the workplace. Okay, you're tired of feeling angry at work. And you've tried a number of things to try to ameliorate this situation. Maybe you tried to hold people to a higher standard in hopes of inspiring excellence. And when that didn't work out because people felt like you were being patronizing and bullying, you decided to withdraw from the situation altogether by telling yourself, I don't care. If they're not going to listen to me at work, then I'm not going to try to improve things or make things better. I'm just going to shut up and keep my own counsel. I don't want this aggravation. I don't want this trouble. And so you might have withdrawn from giving any sort of constructive criticism or something along those lines. And of course, when you did that, that didn't work either, because people felt like you were just doing it out of resentment or spite. They could pick up almost viscerally the resentment that you were feeling. Now, the reason for all of this, like why can't you find something that's comfortable? It's almost like you can't find a comfortable position to sit, or you can't find a comfortable position to relax in. And that's because Venus, when she's traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries, is a very difficult placement for you because it's impossible for you to find a fit, all right? Venus is all about how you relate to other people, and also being a planet that's involved with the law of attraction. She draws into your life, people who are supposed to like the same things that you like and support you in the ways that you want to be supported. But Venus in Aries is a very curious placement for her, okay? On one hand, she's in the zodiac sign of her detriment, which is Aries. And the reason Venus is having a detrimental time or a detrimental effect on you is because she's traveling through a zodiac sign that's ruled by Mars, which is interesting because Scorpio is ruled by Mars. And so what happens is that as Venus is uncomfortable in Aries, which is Mars ruled, she's also making you uncomfortable in Scorpio, which is Mars ruled. What's happening is that it's becoming impossible for you to find a fit. Venus is all about harmonious pairings and partnerings, and you're having a hard time finding a fit. And this is playing out in that part of your solar chart that deals with work, employment, how well you're getting along with people who work for you or people whom you work beside. So when you're having a hard time finding a fit, you're trying different things, but without much success. For instance, if you come on too strong in the workplace, people are going to complain about you being mean, and then if you back off and mind your own business, people are going to complain about you not caring about what they're doing and that you're being negligent and things like that. So it's basically, what am I trying to describe? A no-win situation. That's exactly what I'm trying to describe. And this is something that was happening when Venus was moving forward in Aries, and it became even more so when Venus turned retrograde in Aries on March 1st. Now, what's interesting to me and what I would really want to know about with you is what happened around March 27th when Venus retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces. Well, this is the way I see it. Okay, now Venus having retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces on March 27th would, in my feeling of things, be a good thing. Why? Because Venus retrograded back down into Pisces, which is a water sign, just like Scorpio is a water sign. And this might have allowed you to sort of reassess your situation wisely. Now, why am I saying reassessing it wisely? There's there's feeling uncomfortable and not being able to find a fit, and being Mars ruled, there can be a tendency to be like, well, make yourself find that fit, like you push yourself to find that fit. And what's nice about Venus moving down into a water sign like Pisces is that it would have allowed you to sort of just like stop trying to force a fit, Scorpio, and just leave it be, okay? Leaving something be is anti-Mars, okay, to anyone born under a Mars sign or is a Aries or a Scorpio rising. It's like you never leave things be. You have to power on through. But Venus back in Pisces, a sign that she's exalted in, celebrated in, would have said, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone for now. And you can't win, they can't win. You're both having problems here. Leave it be for now and just see what emerges on its own, which is a very Piscean way of addressing things. Now, Pisces is a water sign just like you. And so that would have opened up really channels of sympathy, of empathy, and of understanding. So when Venus retrograded back down into Pisces, it would have allowed you to see things through another person's eye, to understand another person's perspective on things. Not only because Pisces bestows sympathy, but Pisces also increases your imagination. You can imagine yourself in that person's situation. You can put yourself in another person's shoes, is the way that we would say that nowadays. And that would then allow you to speak to them in a way that you would want to be spoken to if you were in that person's position. So this period of time when Venus comes out of retrograde, she comes out of retrograde on April 12th, this period of time when Venus is moving forward again in Pisces, and before she enters Aries on April 30th, this period of time is wonderful to try a different approach, to try something that's more empathetic, speaking from the heart, speaking from putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So if you do this, if you allow yourself to come from your Pisces place, for lack of a better way of putting this, you'll find yourself hearing people for the first time. And this allows you to choose wisely, those relationships that you're dealing with at the workplace. We can't get along with everyone we work with, but we can find the ones that get where we're coming from. And if you come from this Venus and Pisces place, you'll find the ones who are hearing you, that you can have some kind of conversation with, and you'll recognize the ones that you aren't getting through to, and that's not going to happen. So that when Venus re-enters Aries on April 30th, moving forward, you can just say, to hell with it, which is a very Venus moving through a Mars sign way of dealing with things, of just like, I'm not going to try to make myself get someone, and when we're not getting one another. And basically that kind of takes the combativeness out of the interchanges, because that combativeness was coming from a mounting frustration. When it's like, when you just accept like, okay, this person and I just aren't going to get one another, then you're not as personally invested, you're not as frustrated, you're not as angry, and you let that person be, and that person lets you be, and that might wind up being one of the best working associations that you could possibly have. If you're born under Sagittarius, or you have Sagittarius rising, This period of time with Venus coming out of retrograde is going to make you bolder in your emotional choices. Now, oftentimes when we've been associated with someone for a long time and we split, loved ones and friends can keep the candle burning in hopes that eventually you'll reunite with that person. Now, this could be a romantic relationship or even a marriage. But it can also apply itself to a business relationship or a creative collaboration, where people were like, the two of you together were a great songwriting team, or the two of you together really, filled in one another's foibles in a great way that you became a really successful machine, or the two of you together really created a wonderful space in other people's lives where they felt welcome, So when you decide to split with someone romantically or business-wise or creatively, it's not ridiculous, for the people around you to be like, well, maybe they just went through a rough spot and I'm going to keep the candle burning in hopes that they'll see the folly of their ways and reunite, and in hopes that they'll realize that they're better together than they are apart. And you and the other person might have shared those same hopes. However, it looks like when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries last February, that might have put an end to all of that, because either you or the other person found someone else. Okay. You or the other person might have found someone else that you fell in love with. You or the other person might have found someone else that, you felt more creative with in terms of an artistic collaboration, or you found someone that you really felt like was getting you, and that together you were going to be more profitable or more successful as a business. Now, the fear might have been, either with yourself or the other person, of how do you break this to the people who are all gung-ho on you reuniting, okay? And this is the funny thing about Venus in Aries vis-a-vis you as a Sagittarius. On one hand, Venus entering Aries is a good thing for you as a Sagittarius because you're a fire sign. Aries is a fire sign. And whenever you have a planet moving through a zodiac sign that trines yours, trines are zodiac signs that are related to you by the same element. If you're a Sagittarius, any planet moving through Aries or Leo is going to benefit you because it naturally trines your Sagittarian energy. So Venus moving through Aries is a good thing. It's a fire sign. But remember what I was saying at the beginning of the episode, that Venus is in detriment in the zodiac sign of Aries. And so what it brings is an unwanted association. In this regard, it may be an unwanted association, not for you, but for the people around you who are hoping that you would reunite with someone, okay? And it's out of this fear, this not wanting to upset them, that you might have decided not to share what was going on with your loved ones or friends or associates at work. Or your ex-partner might have asked you not to share what was going on with the people. It's one of those, let's not upset the people right now. I don't know if this is a serious thing or not, so I'm going to keep it to myself, or the ex-partner saying to you, can you keep it to yourself? And you being like, oh, okay, that's not a bad idea. Why not? And so this might have seemed a really good idea at the time, especially when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st. So I'm kind of describing a closeted relationship, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that might have seemed, as I said, all right when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st, but good intentions can often pave the way to hellish situations, as you may have discovered for yourself when Venus retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces on March 27th. Not only did you begin to feel really wrong and even guilty about living a secret life, but the new person in your life might have really grown to resent it. Okay. At first they might have been like, okay, I won't broadcast that we're dating, or I won't broadcast that you're working with me, or I won't broadcast that we're a new creative collaboration until you break it to your friends. But you might have not broken it to your friends and been interested in breaking it to your friends. You might have kept it to yourself. And now the person that you've chosen to be your new partner or collaborator is starting to get really resentful. They're starting to get really angry about it, and they don't like it anymore. So thankfully, Venus coming out of retrograde on April 12th would have made you see how silly this choice was, and would have made you feel bolder about wanting to express your affections openly, or just basically to tell everyone, you're not, I don't know, Shields and Yarnell anymore, you're Shields and Cher or something like that. You've switched, partnerships in some sort of way. Now, that's going to feel good, but Venus is still re-entering Aries on April 30th, which means that you can expect some unwanted backlash. And there's going to be unwanted backlash. Remember that Venus is in detriment when she's traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries. And you might feel a little wavering at first. And certainly the person that you're partnered with is going to be like, are you going to cave in and give in and something like that. But again, Aries is a fire sign like Sagittarius is a fire sign. So as Venus re-enters Aries on April 30th and continues her journey through that zodiac sign, you're going to start feeling bolder and stronger about the choice that you've made. And you're going to be much more open about it. And even if people scowl or say, well, what happened to you and, the person you were with, you're going to find yourself saying, well, that was then and this is now. And you might even find yourself not wanting to, creep around like that or be overly sensitive. You might even feel like, what, this is my new partner. This is the new person that I'm working with, and get over yourselves, which could be a very Aries way of reacting. This is good. This is good because there's nothing good to gain by hiding someone that you feel very strongly about in order not to hurt other people's feelings. And this is going to make you feel bolder, stronger, more centered in your choices. And it's going to make you realize that this is a choice that you should have stood by all along. If you're born under Capricorn, or you have Capricorn rising, you don't need me to tell you what a journey through a psychic minefield it has been since Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th. Now, the reason why triggers are called triggers is because the emotional response that they provoke in us is impossible to explain or control. A situation that is happening now that triggers us transports us back in time to when it happened before, making us react in the same way that we did then, regardless of what our present circumstances are and regardless of the person that you're actually talking to. Venus has been traveling through that part of your solar chart that deals with the past, that deals with the roots, that deals with hearth, home, and family. And certainly that kind of triggering response often happens around family members. It doesn't take much for us to get riled up or even intimidated when we come into contact with a particular family member. And so this idea of triggering is something that's been going on, as I said, since Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries. Now, as a Capricorn, you might not have much patience for that term trigger. You might even regard it as psychobabble. But given the way that you've been experiencing Venus traveling through Aries since February 4th, you've probably begun to develop a begrudging, if not healthy, respect for what your emotional responses have been. Now, Venus turned retrograde on March 1st in Aries, and this might have brought some kind of relief in terms of this triggering experience. You might not have been as sensitive. You might not have been as volatile. It might have let up a little bit. Venus would have retrograded, withdrawn her energies, regressed in some way, but it still would have left you dangling in midair. It still would have left you in a place where, you didn't know why you were having these experiences, these responses, and, people were getting upset and you were getting upset that they were getting upset, and it would have just become, an unholy type of situation. What's nice about Venus having continued its retrograde back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces, like she did on March 27th, is that Pisces is a water sign. Capricorn is an earth sign, Pisces is a water sign, and so they form a natural sextile to one another. Okay, the benevolent aspects in astrology are trines and sextiles. Trines are when a planet is traveling through a zodiac sign that's related to yours by element. It sets up this sort of sympathetic, this copacetic feeling between the two of you. A sextile is a planet is traveling through a sign that you understand because the sign shares your same gender, for lack of a better way of putting it. The 4 elements in astrology are divided into 2 genders. Water and earth were seen as the feminine gender, or what we would call yin energy, and air and fire were seen as the masculine energy, what we would call yang type of energy. Feminine was more responsive, or that's at least the way it used to be taught, and masculine was more assertive. Nowadays, we all know how assertive feminine energy can be. But in any case, getting back to the sextile here, the reason that earth and water were put together is, think of growing something, right? If you have a plant, it's potted in earth and in soil, and you pour water on it and it grows. So the earth and water signs are very much about producing. They're very much about growing tangible things. And so there's a conversational relationship that you have to zodiac signs that sextile yours. And the 2 water signs that sextile yours are Scorpio and Pisces. They're the signs that can talk to you. And when you've got a planet moving through those 2 zodiac signs, you become more receptive to the information that is being communicated to you. So when Venus retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces on March 27th, this might have created a more sympathetic understanding of yourself and the situation that you face with a certain someone. Sometimes we think that we need to objectively analyze our emotions and our feelings, but that's not the only way to understand our emotions and our feelings. Sometimes being sympathetic, sometimes being understanding with our own emotions and feeling patterns, sometimes that might create a more benevolent, more positive result. And so Venus back in Pisces, forming a sextile to your energy in Capricorn, allowed you to have a greater perspective and a deeper feeling for what you are facing. In other words, this would have allowed you to kind of take yourself off the hook, to acknowledge the feelings that you were having, to understand that the feelings that you were having were maybe past based rather than present based, and that you shouldn't feel guilty about that, but somehow you have to manage that. In other words, the rejection that you might face from someone right now shouldn't be triggering feelings of rejection that you felt on the playground when you were in kindergarten, okay? You're a whole different person, and you shouldn't be, traveling back in time back to then. But instead of berating yourself for making yourself feel guilty, or telling yourself you're foolish to be so sensitive, or even saying you're being oversensitive or depressed about the way that you're acting, what's nice about this Venus and Pisces energy is that she's reflective because she's in retrograde, and she kind of allows you to take yourself off the hook. She says, okay, let's talk about what you're dealing with right now. And this more compassionate attitude that you have about yourself is immediately going to put you in a better humor, maybe even make you more humorous, less invested or blinded by those old angers and feelings, and more receptive in the moment. And this is going to be very helpful because Venus is moving direct in Pisces. That's a good thing. But on April 30th, Venus will re-enter the zodiac sign of Aries, and that's going to repeat this series of triggers again. What I like about this is now that you've had time to step back and reassess, when Venus re-enters Aries, you're not going to have that sort of Capricornian thing of like, I have to power through this. This is something that both Aries and Capricorn do. which is this feeling that they have to like power through, what they're going through, which might be a difficult or a challenging time. So instead of trying to master your emotional reactions, because you've spent this time with Venus back in Pisces, you have a fuller understanding, a more profound understanding of what's going on with you. You'll be able to appreciate your feelings and reactions for what they are, which is that they're trying to actually communicate something to you, which is probably associated to recognizing an old wound or an old pattern of behavior. But it's not about reliving it. It's about putting it to rest. It's about saying, okay, that was then, and this is now, and now I'm in the now, and I can put to rest all of those things that happened to me then. This can be an extraordinarily liberating moment, but it can also be a stunning moment of self-realization as well, something that really shows off the benevolent side to Venus traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries. If you're born under Aquarius, or you have Aquarius rising, you've probably been enjoying the sea change that you've been experiencing in your relationships and associations since the beginning of this year. What a difference it makes to live and work with like-minded people. As an Aquarius, you rarely find that fit that you're looking for in life, be it love, work, or friendship. You're often saddled with cantankerous types who are either hard to please or hard to win over. Now, this period of time that Venus was in Aries, remember that Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th. This has actually been quite good for you. This is something that you've really been enjoying quite a bit. And that's because Venus is traveling through a zodiac sign that sextiles your sign. All right. So we have two benevolent aspects in astrology, either a trine or a sextile. A trine is when a planet is traveling through a zodiac sign that shares the same element as you. That means that you're completely simpatico or copacetic. All right, that if you have a sign traveling through the other two air signs, and the other two air signs are Gemini, Libra, and you're the third, Aquarius, when you have a planet traveling through those signs, that sets up this idea of being on the same wavelength. That energy is really simpatico. It's really copacetic. You really get one another. And so these bring good things into your life through the people that you know or through other people whenever you have a planet traveling through a zodiac sign that's linked to yours by the same element. When a planet is traveling through a zodiac sign that sextiles yours, it's not as copacetic as a trine. It's actually more conversational, all right? The element is one that aligns with yours, but not completely, so you can have more of a conversational relationship. In astrology, we have 4 elements: water, earth, air, and fire. And these elements are divided into genders, or it used to be called genders. And so the water and the earth elements were seen as feminine. Nowadays, they're called yin energy. And the air and fire elements were seen as masculine, and nowadays they're called yang energy. And so what happens when you have a planet like Venus traveling through Aries, you're meeting like-minded people, okay? And that began really in earnest on February 4th. And it would have put you in contact with people who truly get you. They really, really understand you. And not only was it 1 or 2 people, but as Venus went through Aries, you began bringing more and more people into your life. Now, these might have been people who challenged the way that you thought, who questioned the way that you thought. Remember, it's not a trine. They're not completely copacetic. But you would have found these conversations invigorating. You would have found these conversations stimulating. They might have poked holes in your thinking that instead of getting defensive, made you go, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that, that I had missed that, that I'd skipped a beat with that. What a wonderful thing to go back and revisit and rethink it. You've really got me thinking about this right now. So, and that's what fire energy does with air energy. It invigorates, it excites. Air energy on its own can be a little bit too objective or a little bit too disconnected from itself. And fire energy always reminds air signs, you're an individual. You're not just, a relationship or an association, or it's not just about pleasing others or looking after the welfare of others. You have to look after your own welfare as well. This is a wonderful thing that fire signs spark in air signs. And this is something that you would have really been appreciating as Venus was traveling through Aries. If you remember from earlier in this forecast, Venus is in detriment in the zodiac sign of Aries. So why this would have been bringing good things to you in your life, of like people that were really exciting you and invigorating you and getting you thinking, and this is a wonderful thing, it would have been having a negative effect with the people who have known you for a long time. Okay, people who've known you for years might have begun to get a bit jealous about these new faces. They might have begun to get a bit questioning about these new faces. They might have become more cantankerous, and they might have become more difficult to please, because they were feeling jealous or they were feeling possessive. And of course, this would have increased when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st. But what's interesting about the way Venus is playing out here is that it's not really about you and what you need to do. It's about the people around you and about what they need to do. The people who have known you for a long time, who feel threatened by the new faces that are coming into your life. Leading with wounded expressions or looking, put out or competitive isn't a compelling argument for you to continue fraternizing with people that you've known for a long time, for you to continue fraternizing with people that you're beginning to suspect more and more that they don't get you and that they might not be interested in getting you. So this is going to pull at your Aquarian need to be free and to make your own choices about the people that you socialize with. You're not going to be so quick to go back to the old way of doing things, to trying to placate other people's hurt feelings or something along those lines. And so I probably see this as a period of time in which you might be kind of like turned off by people who are being jealous or possessive of you and wanting to go and spend time with your new friends and your new acquaintances. What's going to happen or what might have happened that might be very interesting is that when Venus retrograded back down into Pisces on March 27th, that might have impacted more the people that you've had long-standing relationships with in your life than it did you and your new acquaintances. In other words, people who've been in your life for a long time and have gotten used to a certain way of being with you might have begun to question their attitude towards you. They might have begun to understand, like, well, what's attractive about someone who, makes faces or puts down other people? Maybe I'm the one who should be changing my attitude towards my Aquarian friend. And that's going to be interesting because the change that I see with Venus coming out of retrograde is going to be more a change in other people's attitudes regarding you than in what you have to do to please them. What's going to happen is that, Venus comes out of retrograde in Pisces on April 12th, is that it's still a bit quiet. You're not quite sure how that's going to emerge. And you might even not care because you've got new friends and acquaintances. But what's going to happen is that on April 30th, when Venus returns to the zodiac sign of Aries, you may experience an overall improvement in all of your relationships, not only with the people that you've made new friends with, but also your old friends and acquaintances, or maybe even family members, that they really are making an effort to get you, to be more with you, rather than making fun of you or obstinate or stubborn about the changes that you propose in life or relationships or friendships. They might start showing more cooperation, more of an interest in the things that you have to do. And of course, being an Aquarius, which is a tremendously people-oriented sign, you're pretty much the people person of the zodiac. This is going to be absolutely delightful news for you because you don't have to distance yourself from one group of people to go and enjoy another group of people's company, the best solution for an Aquarius always is for everyone to get along and for your social circle to expand exponentially, which is something I would expect to see for you in the weeks that Venus returns to Aries and travels through that particular zodiac sign. People born under Pisces or who have Pisces rising often find themselves in relationships or associations that they don't know how to get out of. Maybe it's the guilt of not sharing the same feelings that the other person has towards you. Or maybe it's the burden of knowing that the other person would be lost without you, and so that's why you stick around. Or maybe it's simply the reluctance of not wanting to hurt anyone else's feelings. These are all things that can lead you to stay in a relationship that you don't really want to be in, which is something that became untenable when Venus entered the zodiac sign of Aries on February 4th. Now, unfortunately, news of this didn't go over well with the other person. In other words, let's say maybe around February 4th, you decided, okay, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. I don't want to be in this association anymore. I don't want to work in this company anymore or be involved in this creative collaboration. You might have just blurted it out. Aries has a tendency to do that, and Venus moving through the zodiac sign of Aries might have compelled you to do that very thing. So around this period of time, what might have been very sort of liberating for you, and you were speaking your mind and expressing what you felt, unfortunately, this didn't go over well with the other person. In fact, the other person might have become hurt or might have become distraught. And so that might have forced you to take back what you said as quickly as you had said it. Maybe you left it off as a joke, or you said, well, that's what I'm feeling, but that doesn't mean that we can't improve it, or that doesn't mean that, we can't turn this into something to sort of rehabilitate in our relationship or association moving forward. And so you might have felt that when Venus turned retrograde on March 1st, that even though there might have been relief in the moment, it doesn't sit well with you. You don't feel comfortable with having backed away. You don't feel comfortable with having said, it's not a big deal, or treating it like a joke. In fact, as Venus turned retrograde and began moving backwards through Aries, you might have begun to really feel like you had lost your chance, that you had lost your chance to say, this relationship isn't working, this association isn't working, I don't want to be here. You lost your chance to say that. You went back on it, and now you just have to accept the consequences of that. And of course, that would have made you feel very angry with yourself and or made you feel very guilty, maybe even both of the things at the same time. Now, one of the wonderful things about a planet coming out of retrograde, like Venus did on April 12th, and remember that it comes out of retrograde in your zodiac sign of Pisces, is that it brings a do-over. It presents a second chance, a chance that should have been taken in the first place. Okay, so it's going to make you feel like all is not lost. I'm feeling a change in the energy here. And okay, now's the time to really say, I wasn't joking before. I really meant what I said. And I really want to end this association or end this relationship. Now, you need to be forewarned that things are not going to go well. Venus on April 30th re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries. So you're going to find yourself facing that person who's going to be just as upset or distraught or angry as they were before. But what's different here is that by Venus having retrograded back into your zodiac sign, it's really reconnected you to your love feelings and to what you want. And so you're going to be feeling the strength of that. You're going to be feeling the power of that. And you don't have to fight to get the other person to believe. You don't have to fight to get the other person to agree. You don't have to make the other person, see that things have been not so great for a long time. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is stay on your side of the fence and be true to you. And if you're feeling like this relationship or association isn't working and that it can't be fixed, you're better off saying that than pretending otherwise. And the other person is better off with you saying that rather than pretending otherwise. So when Venus re-enters the zodiac sign of Aries, it's going to be doing something that Venus in Aries does, which is break ties, okay? Something that you were feeling bad and guilty about. But when it re-enters, you're going to feel that thrust to break ties, and you're going to see for yourself that the other person wasn't really dealing with you, that they were personally invested in a relationship or an association, staying the same, staying status quo because it was comfortable for them, but it wasn't comfortable for you. And so that's what you have to stand by. And you might be impressed with how powerfully you stand by that as Venus makes its way through the zodiac sign of Aries in the next few weeks. And instead of feeling like you have to apologize for not feeling the same way, you'll feel very bold and courageous about stating how you feel right now and that you are very intent on traveling your own path.
Thank you for listening. If you want to stay aligned with the current astrological landscape, consider becoming a Cosmic Insider. It's completely free, and you'll receive expert guidance, exclusive updates, and essential wisdom to help stay one step ahead. Sign up at astrologyhub.com/insider.